We have Tyrone Johnson-Neuland, and Tyrone is part of our Emerging Artists series. It's a joint project between the Cayuga Museum and the Schweinfurth Art Center. And the idea is that we will select an artist who will have an exhibition in both places. And we're looking for people whose proposals considered the dichotomy of showing their work here at the Art Center and sort of the white box gallery place, but also its context within a historical home. And Tyrone applied this year, and we really loved his proposal. He has these abstract paintings that are part of his exhibit here. And next door, when he's done speaking about this work, we're going to go next door. And he has two galleries in the Cayuga that has his works about his travels in Panama. So thank you, Tyrone.
Thank you.
Yep, and I'll hand it over to you.
All right. All I'm going to really do is kind of talk about each piece. I won't go try and give too much away because I'm one that believes that everybody should see it a little differently and take your own aspects from it and enjoy it that way. So starting here, Pick Me is really kind of an overpainting. The original painting was actually called Take a Knee. It was I painted it during the high protest times, during the middle of COVID when I was very productive. But it kind of sat around, didn't really see the light of day, didn't leave the basement, and I actually had an opportunity to do a show in New York last fall for Fashion Week. I had one piece accepted, and then like 2 weeks prior to the show, the gentleman called and said, "Hey, I got another space. Do you have any more work?" I'm like, "Oh, well, not." And they were trying to gear it towards fashion. As you can see, maybe it's not very fashion week oriented. So I was like, what am I going to do? So I kind of worked the flower piece, started, and then kind of just went, completed it with the bust. As you can see, there's the whole bust form is kind of repetitive in some of my stuff. My wife over there thinks they're scary people, but I try to bring a lot of color to them, and maybe there's a little darkness behind some of the thoughts, but I try to brighten it up with the colors and still let you go in another direction if you want to see it. So, and Pick Me in the scent, again, kind of towards that Fashion Week thing, kind of like, look at me, aren't I proud, aren't I glamorous, you know? Pick me. So that's kind of where it went. And a little takeoff is the flower as well. So our next piece here, Let Me See You Smile. Again, kind of a tongue-in-cheek name. Again, back to COVID, and we'll call it 2 winters worth of work. I was doing a lot of work on paper. I'd kind of run out of some canvas, and I had a ton of paper. So the king or the crown thing kind of kept making an appearance in a lot of my works, but they were very small, quick, almost drawing types. So I was like, I really want to do something big with one of these. So I kind of had a landscape piece going, and it just kind of evolved into that. Again, the king over here too, and the whole king thing I think kind of came through, not to be too political, but some of our leaders in the past and some leaders in the world today think they are actually kings, at least in my point of view, and that they can't do anything wrong and they can do whatever they want. And again, kind of the Let You See Me Smile could go either way as a fact of, if you're confident enough, it's almost like let them see you smile in a smirkish way, like one of our former presidents, if you will. Or if you are not confident and you're faking it, put a smile on and go that route. So that's kind of, again, I don't want to say touch full circle on something, but I'd like it to be able to draw from one way or the other and kind of take it in your own context. So that's where that came from. Spirit here was really not necessarily about the form. It came to this form, but this was started out more about I don't want to say a process, but really learning some new things. I've been doing a lot with some spray paint and water and mixing that with the acrylic and trying to control that little bit of chaos that you can't necessarily control when you're mixing oil and water, if you will. So again, this was really kind of an experiment. The underlying painting was really experimenting that and how can I know what kind of effect I'm going to kind of get, but how can I keep it into a form, because it's really pouring. It's pouring water and then spraying on it and then trying to keep that form or create a form that's recognizable. And that's kind of how that went. And it kind of came into this, and I could see the figure. This type of painting, this underneath, usually depending on the weather, is sometimes 2 days that it just has to lay flat. I mean, and that's again too is where the test is that, all right, there's been nights where I've started something like that and it's, oh, that looks awesome. Come back the next morning, I was like, it was tilted a little or it slid off the canvas, and I'm like, oh, well, I guess that didn't work. So again, this was really just trying to practice that process and get a little better handle on it. Then introverts party, or dance party here. Again, I consider myself an introvert. I think if anybody that truly knows me kind of believes that. So again, it was kind of contradictory. This again, I had an underpainting that was very light that I'd started. It didn't really have a direction yet, and I hadn't done something this large and actually gone back to true paintbrush stroking. And I was like, you know what? It's been a while since you've really done something just with texture and with the brush. Go to town on it, and again, the forms just kind of came their way, and then again, it was just a matter of picking the colors and going from there. So this small one right here called Teeth, this actually I found in our attic. It is one of my original paintings. That it was one of my true bathroom arts. We had it in our upstairs bathroom. It was more like a sailboat, the original painting, and I just kind of ran across that. I was like, oh God. The children aren't using the bathroom. My wife had kind of taken their bathroom over and redesigned it, and I was like, well, there's an extra piece of canvas I got. So I took it back downstairs, and we had some Cornish thing going off on the sailboat that I wanted to keep. And again, back to that scary bust that I just could not resist. I was like, those are just so Teeth. And then again, throw some spray paint on it. Let's see what happens. And again, I try not to make it scary. It could be really scary if you want it to be, but it's supposed to be in fun, and again, enjoy the colors. Here, again, back to the crown thing. Again, this and the name itself, Target Practice. Again, not being political, but some of those things that are going on in the world with gun violence and stuff like that. That again, back to government rule. Actually, somebody saw this somewhere and thought I was doing a play on America versus the crown, if you will, across the sea. So again, it wasn't my intention when I was doing it. Again, it was more a fact of leaders and, nothing really being done about the violence itself. So, and then the face itself, again, you don't necessarily see even next door, even if it's a form of a body, very few times I actually do a face, and it was like, it's time that you try and paint a face again. It's been a long time, so. And that, it's just selfie. I know it doesn't look like me, but the reference was myself. And then this final piece here, again, totally trying to get away from the body. I have done a few other flower pieces before, so I kind of did that. And then in fact, this was entered to the store next door and did not get in. So actually when it was going on and I got accepted here, I was almost like, I really hope that one piece doesn't get in because it would look good with the rest of the other pieces. And then the title itself, actually I painted that just before I brought it here, going, found life, meaning like, well, you lost over here, but you found life in a new form and you get to be present out here. So that's kind of where that came from. When I applied for this show, these were done. This wasn't an issue. I knew I could fill this, and I even have more. Next door, I had been teasing with an idea with doing a Panama show for a while. I think I might have had 10 started when I applied, thinking, it's not going to happen. But it seemed like the right timing. That again, it was kind of if you could apply and do something in a juxtaposed position. I was like, well, what's better? I got this, and then we can kind of do something in that space. So when I got the news, I was like, okay. And I started looking at the floor plan. I'm like, oh my Lord, I'm gonna need like 20 to 30 paintings over here. I've got 10 started. And when I got the news, I was a week and a half away from going to Panama for 2 weeks. And then when I got back, I had a month. So I banged out just 28 of them over there in less than 3 months. Well, thank you for making this trek over here.
It was tough.
So these are my Panama paintings. There's 28 of them. When I started these, it was just kind of searching for a new topic, something that I could do in a series. If I had ever moved down there and wanted to do a type of show, how would I go about doing something? So I actually, this one over here on the last of the wall, I think is one of the first ones, and so was the water tower when I first started these. Just using reference from all the places we went to. Our water tower here, or Torre de Agua, was actually more or less our first place we stayed at when we went to Panama, just north of Panama City. I want to say Chitree area it was. We actually stayed, it was a bed and breakfast, but it was also a monkey haven, safe haven. They'd taken in monkeys that had been abused and stuff like that, so they had their own little yard and all that stuff. But on the property, they had water towers, obviously, for during the dry season. Obviously, the wet season's wetting up. So what's kind of odd about it is that the ones they had were big and they were kind of shallow to the ground. I'm like, well, I'm going to put it on a tower, kind of like what we have, and do something like that. And then sure enough, when we were down there this year, we saw way more part of the country than you could think of. And actually all their water towers are probably 10, 20 feet up high. And I was like, oh, all right, so I wasn't all that off. I was like, that's so relevant now. So again, just kind of my same style, again, doing some spray paint stuff and then mixing some acrylics over it. Our piece here, Dream Studio. This is actually a true house structure in Boquete, Panama, that we were just walking the streets, and just a very cool little house. I took a picture of it, ended up posting it and sending it to my mother-in-law, and she said, oh, that is so beautiful. She's like, something, and I was like, yeah. I said, that would be my dream studio. I said, if we could just move here tomorrow, I would buy that house and we would live in it and I'd be able to paint on it. It was just very cool. And she's like, oh, you got to do a painting of it. I don't want to say the struggles I had with these is size, and I found myself going back to my graduate work of illustration, and I was like, you can't get bogged down in trying to be an illustrator. So I put it off. I'm like, I'm not going to do it because there's no way I can do an expressionistic representation of that house without making it look like a house. So I debated, and then finally I was like, I need another painting. So this was actually the last one that got done, and I tried, again, I tried not to go the traditional route, but it was hard not to. And but the color of the property was green anyways, and the pink was just kind of added, and there she is. But that's probably the truest traditional that you'll see in here, obviously. And again, there was many that I fought with when I started. I'm going, you're going down the wrong path. You got to think back to your big paintings and just make it in a smaller form. And Fungal Trail, truly abstract thing, but the colors and the feeling that it was supposed to be is the handful of walks that we actually took in the countryside, of being in that tropical area, that somewhat jungle area. So again, just playing off on some of this, and I've noticed some of the, I hate to admit it, but some of the Instagram artists that I follow, I've noticed a lot lately that they all have something in their painting that makes repetitive. So this kind of spray paint, you'll see in a few of mine, that was kind of my chosen thing. When I can put that in there, somebody will eventually say, oh, that's a Tyrone Johnson-Neuland, because I can tell just because that form's in there. So back traditional again. I tried to not make it traditional, but fruit everywhere down there. every morning, fresh. I mean, driving down the road, there's trucks anywhere. You can buy what, a watermelon for how much? $4 for a dollar. And the bananas do not taste like ours. They're not as textury. They are just awesome. So very healthy eating down there. So I had to do something with fruit. Moving on, remember midnight. This is actually from when we were down there this time. They have their carnival. It's kind of like Mardi Gras, if you will. It's a little different, but depending on what town you are in, depends on how extravagant or crazy it was. This was actually in Padassi, a small little village, and we got down there not thinking that they would have a party scene because we weren't really into that, but sure enough we got down there and parades going on and marching around their square, so we went down and did some festivities that day, and we got talking to the mojito guy. And I was like, so how long does this go on? I said, I know it ends on Tuesday. They have their like Fat Tuesday, and I believe this was Monday. And he's like, and again, trying to pick up the Spanish. I said, I think he said they were gonna start back up at midnight and go to midnight the next night. I was like, oh, I don't know. So anyways, we're back at the bed and breakfast that night. She had gone to bed, and I'm sitting out in the courtyard. And sure enough, about midnight, all this racket starts going on. I go, what's going on? Sure enough, it was parade time. So I walked down the street, floats were out, and here they go again at midnight. So that's where the name comes, but this is one of the queens. They do, it's depending on what town you are, but the big thing is about queens and all that good stuff. In fact, the town we were in before, they do I don't know how they battle it out, but there's two neighborhoods, and it's always this queen from this queen, and they do some contests and stuff like that, but very extravagant, their outfits. So, and again, this was, for those that were next door, kind of spray paint and water. And this was one that I could I knew what I was looking for. I was looking for that queen form and hopefully being able to control it just enough. And then obviously I can go back in, and then the mask and stuff like that, I just added after. But again, it's that learning of that process of how to control that uncontrollableness. So. And then busca. I've actually been taking Spanish. I took Spanish in high school, but being at the university, I can take a class for free each semester. And I'm like, oh, why don't I just start taking Spanish again? So buscar, to look for, was one of the first vocabulary words. And this ironwork and structure here, this is actually from Old Town, Casco Viejo, which is Old Town, Panama. It's very touristy now, but it's all original buildings prior to the building of the Panama Canal that had been run down, and money has come back into it, and people are in there renovating. So that's kind of where that came from. Toro, it's pretty obviously, it's a bull, but if anybody's ever been to Latin America, their cows look a lot different than ours. They are very skinny, and even in the bulls. So it was just when we first saw our first cattle down there, we're like, well, now we know why the steak doesn't taste good, because they have no meat on them. But it's irrelevant to their culture. So, and I guess that's something I should mention here is there's kind of, I found myself doing 3 kind of topics, cultural type things like this, architectural, and then what was my other one? Oh, scenery, landscape, if you will. When I, again, trying to get 28 of them, I was like, where your idea is going to come from? And then when I saw that they kind of had a pattern of those, it either fell in one of those 3 categories, I tried to even the count out, if you will. I want to have 8 or 7 of these somehow in a cultural aspect, 7 or 8 in a architectural, and then the landscape. So, La Puerta, door. This was actually the last bed and breakfast we stayed at. We stayed at a little upstairs apartment, came down the stairs, and underneath the stairs was their little storage thing, and they have this rickety old door. Just took a picture of it, and if I had the picture, I could show you, but it almost matches perfect. It was just too easy, inspirational. It was like, that's just like the coolest little space. I'm gonna paint that. Mountain Queen. Again, really just inspired by the countryside itself. There's another one over here we'll talk about. El Valle is an area, a mountain area. It was actually created, the valley was created from when a volcano erupted thousands of years ago, and it's created this. But so this again was, again, it's kind of obscure, but it was trying to think of that feeling that I had living in the mountains. It was windy, gorgeous, and just kind of came to that. And one of those paintings where it was like, is it done, is it not? Again, back to some of my spray paint stuff and then working back over it. And it was like, all right, don't overwork it. It's one of those that kind of is simple, but I think it works really well. Going back to Casco Viejo, this actually, I thought when I started these, I might do many of them, and this one actually is restoration, and that was going to kind of be the series theme, if you will, if I had done everything like that. But again, this is just from a church, an abandoned church that's all opened up, and some ironwork showing, just in an abstract form. But some really cool spaces down there. If I had the money and was a architect and a constructor, I'd be there in a heartbeat, because it's just some really beautiful spaces that just need some love and care. Then we got Diable Rojo. Again, back to the illustration thing. Diable Rojo, that's actually what they call them, is they have their bus transportation. And in fact, it started in the city, and you only see it in some of the areas just out of the city. Very colorful, painted vehicles. I don't want to say it's graffiti style, kind of a mix, but controlled graffiti and just, you know, Spanish language painted across it and whatever. So I was like, those are really cool. And I mean, every time we saw them, I was like, you know, chrome that just shine. And I was like, you know, you could just see it bouncing down the road. I was like, I got to do something like that. But again, I'm trying not to put myself back in that controlled thing of painting it realistic. So what I'm going to do, and this was purely accidental. I thought this was going to be my bus painting. I had sketched it out. And then I was back to the experiment of, let's throw some spray paint and water down and see where we're gonna go, because right now you're kind of lost. I was searching that night. Those colors came instantly. I'm like, oh my Lord, that is just beautiful colors. Let it sit for 2 days. One of the few that didn't run too much, and it just dried. And then I'm like, well, I guess that's not my bus painting anymore. And then I started looking at it, and I did the research, and I was like, well, they call them Red Diablos, if that's not devilish enough. And that's how I can get away with it. I can just still have my reference of a bus and not really go too out of the realm. So again, that's purely accidental, that I just thought fit perfect together. Gringo, should be self-explanatory, but again, kind of your Panama jack hat, as well as burnt to a crisp white boy. It's that simple. There's nothing much more to it than that. And then we have Cementerio de Belize, which is, I actually had to have my Spanish teacher sister help me with the name. Beautiful cemetery and how to put the forms in. But my wife and I have visited cemetery since our first date back in 1986. So any place we go, in fact, she was talking to our daughter who's going to Ireland in a couple of weeks. She's like, make sure you go see the cemeteries because they're just beautiful. So we found one in Panama, and that's where the inspiration came from that. And then the last one in this room, Carnival. This is actually I did two, we'll call them portraits, for a buddy of mine for Christmas of his children. And again, I was like, oh my Lord, I can't believe I said yes, because I don't do that type of work anymore. It was, first one I started was horrible. So I had a free canvas. I was like, all right, we're gonna slap some paint over that and cover it up. It had gotten really dark, so that's kind of where the black came from. And the animalistic mask, if you will. Again, it's prominent in Carnival. So that's kind of where that came from. So again, back to restoration, if you will. This is one of the completed buildings. This is back in Casco Viejo. But I didn't want to name it Casco Viejo because I knew there would be more inspiration in that little area of the community. So it's actually on Avenue A, so simple, but again, just beautiful architecture. The inspiration was easy to come with, and again, try and do it quick without any reservations or restriction, and there we go. The next three, if you will, we're kind of into that landscape thing. And again, just trying to play with some paint and see how it mixes, and again, try to control it. This is El Valle, again, beautiful mountain areas that collapses into this big valley. It's wonderful. Not that this is a specific hill, but there was a hill that I climbed that I guess at this point in my age, I might be a little afraid of heights. Very windy that day up there, and I'm like up there shaking. But so just trying to capture that feeling there. Oceanside here, we went to I don't want to say remote, but an unpopulated area, Las Lajas. Actually met a young couple, a young man from California and his girlfriend from New Zealand. At least he came over, or went down to Panama to do some mission work, actually. Ended up staying, opened up a hostel, and she teaches surfing lessons. That's perfect. Where was that 30 years ago? So anyways, that's kind of where that was. I hadn't seen waves that big really anywhere in my life, so it was kind of just an ocean inspiration, if you will. And I don't know how the fish made it in there. Truly accidental, but I still think it's a fish. Again, this is back to Boquete. Gorgeous area, a lot of expats, a lot of Americans live there. I thought that might be the place we would end up. The day we went, I think it was 67 and raining sideways. My wife's like, we can get this at home. That's not, I'm like, you're right. So a beautiful, it's like country, coffee country, mountains, volcano area again. And this is actually based on a beautiful river that just runs down through the valley. But again, kind of that wet, misty. It was just like if you were at Lake Placid on a misty day. I was like, yeah, you're right. So, but really nice. Then we got El Barrio here. This is actually from a building just outside of Casco Viejo. With Casco Viejo, again, trying to do some research and actually understand what it was about is more or less when the Americans left after the canal was built and we kind of exited, things just started to fall apart in Old Town. And then obviously, I don't want to say obviously, but underprivileged people kind of moved in and just started occupying spaces until they passed an act, a historical thing, when they realized this is a place that we could start making money by bringing in foreigners and letting them build things up. So what they ended up doing was going in and more or less forcing these people out. Not that they had, more or less they had squatters' rights, but they more or less just pushed them out into an area just outside of the limits in your traditional, what you'd call some of our towers, if you will. You know, urban planning is like, all right, let's just build a big building and throw people in it. So that's kind of where that was. These three here, the colors, just actually this painting and this painting were done at the same time, so the colors this was one of an earlier one. Generational here, really based on things that I've seen or that I experienced. One of the areas we went to, brand new road, beautiful area, brand new road, but yet every mile or two down the road, somebody'd be riding their horse. And the people we'd met said they'd been building that road for 10 years. When we came here, there might have been 2 cars. Everybody rode horses. So again, kind of a mixture of generational and some of the architecture. And then the spray paint itself was just kind of, if you will, teasing the youth, if you will, if you get into the city. Not much different than what you see in any of our cities as far as how the youth treat things and how they live. This is kind of at the street art, more or less. This is what this was based off of. A lot of graffiti down there, some really beautiful graffiti, and then some that's just, you know, they're just tagging things. But I guess it helps. It's in a foreign language. It looks a little cooler than some of the stuff we have. And this one, this is kind of Despoleto is just really kind of being on the beach, and Despoleto is actually like deserted or uninhabited. We found, again, some really cool spaces that you just don't find anywhere, where there's not tourists everywhere. It's like, this is just great. There's nobody around. So again, just trying to not be too realistic, but still give you that feel of that sand and the water. And then over here we got high tide and low tide. Truly just experimental pieces. Throwing some paint down, and then the spray, this is the spray paint kind of happening at the same time as it was drying. I believe this one was done first and came back in with the black to kind of give it more of a horizon aspect. And then I'm like, I'm gonna do another one like that with, in this case, some different colors. And then when they came, the names just kind of came after. And again, probably, I hate to admit it, there's probably not more than maybe 3 hours worth of work. I mean, it was like quick. It's like, you know, throw your 2 base colors down, and then hopefully you don't screw it up with the spray paint, and let's see how it reacts. So, and then the last 3 over here. Canal zone. Again, this kind of goes back to the separation of the canal area to, if you've ever even seen pictures of Panama City, some spots are just very modern, and I was trying to capture a lot of glass down there. I mean, all their skyscrapers and stuff like that. So that, again, kind of an urban feel in front of the money. And then obviously the water is pretty self-explanatory. This was, trying to capture a figure, if you will, with the Spanish hat and some of the colors that give it just kind of a playful piece. And then getting back here, Fresquete de Agua, kind of a dam. This is actually a dam probably 2 hours north of Panama City that we just kind of came upon. But again, playing with some technique, but trying to keep things just simple enough to like, all right, don't touch it anymore. It's very simple, but the colors and then, you know, and the motion itself, I thought worked just right. So this really came from Costa Rica theme. It was our first spotting of a toucan. So when I was doing more, this, as you can see very painfully here, underneath it, it was very illustrated, and I hated it. It was too realistic, and I'm like, I just hate it. So I kind of made them a couple ugly toucans, but I figured just right. We can put that one there and this one there. That's a little more obscure than this one. But yeah, this was one of the early ones, and I had to decide, like, are you really gonna go traditional back to your illustration days, or are you gonna paint freely like the way that you want to? So I had to scrap it. I'm like, yep, there's no way I'm doing 30 paintings like that. So that's it. Thank you.